Hello and welcome to the Reviews Brothers, where we are going through the entire A to Z of PlayStation 2 games and picking out a measly 10 games per letter that don't get talked about a whole lot. And here we are on the letter H. Now, the premise isn't many more complicated than that, so how about I shut up, you press that subscribe button, and we just get onto the games. We are starting with Haven, Call of the King. This is a 3D platform adventure game where you play as Haven, who is one of many people enslaved by an alien race that are forced to work in the mines and do all sorts of crappy jobs to help the aliens build their empire. The alien leader, Vetch, gets a message to say that one of the slaves is basically the chosen one and will stop him. So he tries to find out who it is and kill them before you have the chance to kill him. And yep, it's you. It's Haven, who happens to be an inventor as well. And he's made a cool mechanical bird thing, and his missus has been kidnapped, because they've got to get that in there somewhere. Gameplay wise, Haven really tries to do a lot, and it has a bit of mixed results. The majority of the game is a 3D platformer where you'll explore mines, caves, towns, forests, enemy bases and all sorts. The variety in locations is pretty damn good here. As with most 3D platform games of the time, there's a lot of stuff for you to collect that is usually your main objective in any given place. You'll need to explore to find keys or items to fix or create things to help you into the next area. The levels are all large and tend to look pretty damn nice as well. The game has an excellent draw distance, which I always appreciate. Levels are fairly linear, but being large they can be hard to get around and easy to be lost in. Thankfully, Haven has a decent enough control, so you can run, double jump, climb, grab ledges and attack. In fact, there's loads of moves to learn here. You'll find pots all over the place as well, and these do a few things. Some explode, some have items in them, and some will launch you into the air for high jumps. You've got a yo-yo thing that you can use to attack enemies, though not everyone can be killed. What is annoying though is that it launches you forward every time you attack while you're moving, and if you touch an enemy you'll take damage, so you can get hurt quite a lot when you shouldn't really be able to. You can get a few upgrades for it and even a projectile weapon as you play. As well as the platforming though, you'll have on-rail shooter levels, flying levels, vehicles, and there's even a section where you get a jetpack and have to save a burning village. There really is quite a lot here. There's also plenty of cutscenes to tell you the story that are quite well done, and I have to say I really like the graphics and animation here. The controls are not perfect, but they're perfectly manageable and actually kinda good, though there were times where I'd die and it definitely wasn't my fault. Surprisingly, the camera is actually decent as well and didn't cause me many issues at all. I did read that this was meant to be the start of a trilogy of games, but they were never made. But that doesn't stop this one being a surprisingly epic adventure, and if you're a fan of games like Jak and Daxter, then this is well worth checking out. If you prefer your 3D platformers to have more puzzles to them, then you might want to take a look at Herdy Gerdy. This is a fun little puzzle game where you're an aspiring shepherd whose dad was meant to take part in a competition but was put under a spell and now won't wake up. So you take it upon yourself to explore the land to quickly learn the shepherding ways and win the competition to break the spell. It's a daft story, but it fits the game pretty well. You are Gerdy, and the main aim of the game is to visit the 40 or so locations, which each have a selection of animals in them that need to be herded into their respective pens. Each of the different creatures has their own ways of being herded. Some you can just sort of run around and chase them and point them in the right direction, whereas others will need more coaxing with the use of various items. It starts off simple enough, but you'll have multiple animal types in the levels that each require their own strategy, and keeping an eye on them all can be very tough. Also, to get the items that you need for some of the creatures isn't easy. You'll meet loads of other characters as you play, and a lot of them will have various tasks for you to complete. Usually once you do this, they'll give you an item that will help you out. You can get boots that make you faster and jump higher, a flute that attracts certain animals, a stick that attracts other animals, and so on. Completing some of their tasks can be tough, and the game is not as easy as you'd think. When you're rounding up the creatures, you also have to be on the lookout for the pink bears. They'll chase you and eat your little critters. You want to avoid them as much as possible, as if you lose too many creatures, you'll have to restart the level. Thankfully, there are bear traps littered around, and if you can lure them over one, they will be trapped. Or if there's another bear, you can even make them fight, giving you valuable time to get out of there or sneak past with a flock of chicken things. You get a pretty handy map, which you'll use a lot, and it's colour coded to tell you if an area has tasks to complete, making it clear if you're going to be going to a place with nothing for you to do so you don't waste time, which is kinda good as the loading times are pretty damn long here. As you can see, the game really looks great. It's got a cool cartoon art style to it, and it just looks like a cartoon. The animation is excellent and it really does make you want to carry on playing to meet the other crazy characters and see the new creatures. The only downside really to the game is that it can get a bit repetitive, and I did find that there were times where I was a little hesitant to continue after failing an area, as they can be a pain in the ass to collect all the animals, but that's kind of the point. There are also times when it's really not clear what the game wants you to do or how to do it, and I did actually have to check a guide a couple of times quite early on. But the gameplay is actually pretty solid, and it is nice to have a different style of game. If you are secretly a sheepdog, you'll definitely love this. Time to punch people now with Hard Knock High from my favourites over at D3. Hard Knock High is a deliberately stupid action fighting minigame thing where your character, that you name yourself, is a new person in town and for some reason is obsessed with beating up people from the other schools to prove that your school is the best. Is this a thing in Japan? But unfortunately, the other schools have some pretty tough people in them, so you've got to do a lot of training to build up your stats if you want the chance of beating them to a pulp. So you go to the map screen where you'll see a selection of locations. Each location is either a training area or a school. You want to go to the training areas first, where you have to complete various mini-games that involve timing button presses, mashing buttons as fast as you can, spinning the analog sticks, or a combination of all those things. Doing this builds up the strength in your arms, legs, or grapple, which makes those attacks stronger. And more importantly, is your glare ability, which I'll get to in a minute. Sometimes on the map you'll go to a place that you'd normally train, and then you'll see one of the pictures of a rival school person there. This means if you go to that location, you have to have a fight. The fights are pretty simple though. You've got a kick, punch and grapple button as well as a block. As you'd expect, doing combinations of these does different combos, and while it might be tempting to avoid the fights at the start so you can build up your stats, fighting these people actually helps you, as sometimes after a fight you'll learn one of the moves that they've been using. Each of the different schools have different fighting styles, so you actually want to kick the crap out of as many people as you can so you can learn a variety of different attacks before you fight the bosses. But you have to be careful though, as if you do get your ass kicked too much, you can actually hurt your head and forget some of the moves that you've learned. When you're ready, you can head to any of the available schools where you've got to make your way through the courtyard to get to the boss. This is where your glare comes in. Enemies will constantly walk towards you as you slowly trudge towards the boss, all powered up like a Dragon Ball Z character, but you can point the analog stick towards them to glare at them and scare them away. If any of them get past your glare and touch you, you've got to fight them, meaning that you might have less health when you get to the boss, if you even get to the boss. The better your glare ability, the faster and wider it shoots, so it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, but I really do love it. It's got a good sense of humour. Beat the school boss and you run that school, and as you play, more locations will open up for you to take over. Graphically, the game's pretty good. It's a budget game with the classic D3 style, but it looks fine and animates well enough. The fighting is a little stiff, but as you level up, it gets easier, and it's definitely a game that you have to do a fair bit of grinding in. But I found it to be so addictive, and I really wanted to keep leveling up to fight the schools that kick my ass, and I had a hell of a lot of fun doing it. More action now with Hidden Invasion, and then it's another budget title. You play as a cop from a special forces unit who's called in to help deal with some terrorists that have planted bombs around your city. And what starts out as a simple case of defusing bombs and punching people in the face soon turns into a massive conspiracy plot where it turns out that aliens have invaded and are taking over Earth from the inside, transforming humans. Yep, it's basically a game of secret invasion. The gameplay here is pretty basic, but not always easy. You choose from two characters who pretty much play the same, and you're put into a fairly large level and given an objective to complete, which is usually destroying something, defusing a bomb, or maybe just punching everyone you see in the face. An arrow does appear on the screen and usually guides you roughly where you need to go, so you can follow it as best as you can, while beating up any thugs you meet along the way. Though be careful, as the arrow does get confused quite a lot, and often I didn't know where the hell it wanted me to go. The thugs in the levels can be a pain in the arse as well. You've got a few attacks, a punch and a kick, and the usual combos that go along with them. But it's one of those games where you've got to finish your animations and can't move or change direction until you've done whatever fancy flip you're in the middle of. This can make actually hitting people harder than it needs to be a lot of the time. But when it works, it works. Enemies often have weapons like knives or batons, and even a selection of guns. Thankfully, you do have a shield, and if you're attacked with a projectile, your shield will automatically deplete before you lose any health. But if you're punched in the face, your shield can't handle that. Thankfully, your shield does recharge automatically when you're not being shot. You do also have your own pistol, which is powerful, and enemies will drop ammo for it, as well as actually dropping the weapons that they're carrying if you kill them. And you'll want to use these as much as possible, as the shotguns and assault rifles are really good fun to use. If you want to save ammo, you can just hit people in the face with the gun. Though you do look a bit stupid shooting people here with the assault rifle, as you hold it like you would a pistol. It's pretty dumb. Levels very quickly become maze-like, and you need to explore to find keys to open doors to reach the exit or your objective. What doesn't help is that all the levels have a time limit, though you do tend to get more time than you need. But even more annoyingly, you have no control over the camera whatsoever. This is a real pain in the ass. When enemies are attacking you, you can tell where they're attacking you from thanks to the markers from your shield that appear, but just being able to move the camera would have been a lot less of a hassle, and considering the right stick doesn't seem to do anything, I don't really know why it doesn't. Also, there's times where the camera follows you, but other times it will change to a fixed angle. This changes the direction of the controls and can make it hard to walk up some stairs. Sounds dumb. The game looks pretty basic, but it's what you expect from a budget game. Basic character models and levels, but it's not offensive. Though the actual gameplay definitely does grow on you, and the cheesy story is daft but a bit of fun, though it does take itself quite seriously. If you can handle some jank though, you should give this a go. It's harder than you'd expect, but it's amusing enough for the few hours that it'll take to get through it. Time for a shooter now with Homura. This is a game I'd never heard of and really can't find much about, but that's alright. It's a vertically scrolling shooter, so you pretty much already know all you need to know, but I'll do some waffling anyway. There really isn't much in the way of story here. Now, maybe there would be if there was a manual I could read, but that doesn't really matter, and the game actually doesn't tell you anything. You're a flying ninja bloke which can fire loads of shots straight ahead of you, and you also have a sword. There's loads of enemies as well, all of which fire a ton of shots, so this is probably classed as a bullet hell, though I've definitely seen more bullets. As you know, the screen constantly scrolls upwards and enemies will be appearing for you to shoot down. Each one you kill drops a coin that builds up your attack and your special meter. Once this gets to the top, you can do some cool looking magic attacks. The enemies here are pretty standard, though they look cool enough. You get horrid Batman creatures, other flying samurai, monsters, birds, shapes that don't really look like anything, and of course some massive bosses. As mentioned, bullets will be flying around all over the place, and thankfully you have your sword, which you can slash every few seconds. Doing this will clear any bullets near you and save your ass, but you do have to wait about 5 seconds between swings, so use it sparingly. Thankfully, the game is generous with its hitboxes, and you're actually able to do a pretty decent job of avoiding bullets most of the time anyway, as long as it doesn't touch you right in the face. You also move faster when not shooting, so there's times when you want to resist the urge to just hold down the fire button so you can speed to the other side of the screen. The bosses in particular are great to fight with cool patterns, and they are of course massive monsters. As you play through the levels, you're given a choice of routes, each of which is either easy or hard, but I do have to say, for me, even the easy ones were pretty damn tricky. While it's all basic polygons, I do quite like how the game looks, and more importantly, it all runs very smoothly. Now, I'm no shooter expert, but if you like them, I'm pretty sure you'll like this as well. Hot Wheels toy cars have a surprising amount of good games, and here is Hot Wheels Velocity X Maximum Justice. As it's a Hot Wheels game, it's mainly about racing, but also about combat. Therefore, it's a car racing combat game. There is a stupid story here featuring some very early 2000s characters. You play as Max Justice, who is out doing some street racing when your robot mate, who's basically Alpha from Power Rangers, calls to say there's an alarm going off in your city. You go back to investigate and find out that there's a load of stuff going on that's way too overdramatic for a Hot Wheels game, and you have to stop it. In a nutshell, there are bad cars and you've got to stop them. Luckily, stopping them is a lot of fun. The game takes place over a variety of locations where you're given a few different objectives that are split into levels, pretty much all of which boil down to driving to a location within a time limit, then either collecting an item, destroying other vehicles, or doing both of these things, and then get out of there before the timer runs out. And that might sound a bit boring, but actually most of the time it's not, though it can be incredibly difficult. You get to choose from a load of different vehicles, each with their own stats, and you can unlock loads more as you play. Any vehicle you see in the game can be unlocked at some stage, which is a really nice touch, and they really do play noticeably differently to one another. In fact, you're almost forced to try out as many vehicles as you can, as some are much more suited to certain missions and levels than others, which is cool. It's like they actually put thought into this game. The worlds are all pretty massive here as well, and they're filled with jumps, loops and ramps that you can do tricks on. Tricks are just a case of spinning your car in any direction, and the more you do, the more points and boost rewards you get. You double tap the accelerator to use your boost, and you can use this to go up walls and get even more air. There's also point icons that you can collect in the levels to rack up high scores and unlock some of the other cars. And as well as this, there's loads of weapons, many of which need to be unlocked. There really are a lot here. These weapons can be used to destroy other vehicles, but be careful as they have the same ones. There's laser cannons, spiked wheels, oil barrels, EMPs and more. As well as the story mode, you also have a few other options as well. It's like a game that keeps on giving. There's races which you can do against a friend or a CPU, and there's even a free roam mode which gets rid of most enemies and the annoying timer and lets you just explore the levels doing tricks and generally just having a good time. And that's the thing with this game, just driving around the levels is actually a lot of fun. The controls are great, and the simple tricks and boost mechanics make doing some parkour, or should I say carpour, really satisfying to do, and you can even use the shoulder buttons to strafe, which is stupid, but it really works. Couple that with some cool graphics and it just makes it one that you want to keep coming down to. There are a couple of downsides of course. One is that a lot of the story missions can be very difficult, even early on, and you'll be replaying them over and over thanks to the fact that they have a timer which can be very strict. And there's also times where you might crash into the wrong thing by accident which causes you to instantly fail the mission. I hate that. The other thing that's a bit of a pain in the ass is that if you're trying to play this in multiplayer, you really need to play through the single player first to unlock as much of the stuff as you can, otherwise you barely have any tracks or vehicles to use. But, you know, that's kind of the fun. Overall though, this game is a hell of a lot of fun to play and definitely should not be overlooked. Sticking with toys, here is Hype the Time Quest, which is based on the Playmobil toy line for kids. This is a 3D action adventure where you play as a knight called Hype who was frozen in time only to be resurrected by a wizard who is trying to get a knight to help him save his kingdom from an evil king. So you make a deal. You'll help the wizard stop the evil king and he'll send you back to your time so you can defeat the Black Knight that froze you in the first place. That's actually a pretty cool plot for a Playmobil game. Hype has to explore a load of pretty large 3D worlds where you'll meet various people that will give you quests to complete, which will then earn you new items and weapons and even magic, to help you take down your enemies and defeat the evil king and knight. You're armed with a sword and crossbow from the start, and you'll need to use these to fight the surprisingly tough enemies that you come across. I thought this was going to be a kids game, but it's actually bloody hard. You'll fight the usual bats and wolves and other animals like that, and even these can be a pain in the ass to kill thanks to their erratic behaviour and the lack of a lock-on function in the game. But once you do get used to the combat, it's actually quite fun. My strategy is to just strafe and attack. Most enemies will swing and miss you, especially other knights, and you can get a few hits on them and sometimes even stun lock them. Enemies will drop money or sometimes health or magic potions. You can use the money you get to buy items in the town that you can use from your inventory whenever you want. And you'll need loads of health potions, as when enemies do hit you, they do a ton of damage. As you're exploring, you'll find a town, and there's loads of places to visit and people to speak with. Often they don't really tell you exactly what you need to do, but just give you hints, like one telling you that the water tastes funny in the town, so you go to the well, which leads you to a dungeon to complete. You carry on like this until you get to beat up the king to a bloody pulp. But like I said, it's not an easy game. In fact, it really is bloody hard, and kids will definitely struggle with this one. Sadly, a lot of that is down to the controls, which I would say are manageable at best. It's all tank controls, which isn't the end of the world, but turning is sluggish, and the jumping here is pretty damn bad and floaty, so it doesn't help when you're in the sewers or a forest, and there's a lot of precise platforming sections which are really damn hard thanks to no fault of your own. Couple this with a save system which forces you to save at specific points, often quite far away from one another, and it's a real pain in the ass. Again though, you do learn a tactic, which is never to run and jump unless you have to. Instead, you want to get as close to a platform as possible, then jump and just hold forward on the stick so you move forward just a tiny bit. What also doesn't help is that the camera is always right behind you and you have no control over it at all. And it's a real shame, as I was genuinely really having fun exploring the world and getting hints. I actually like the fact that it doesn't tell you exactly what to do and where to go, but the hints are clear enough to make it kind of obvious. When it works, the platforming was fun, and the game does have a certain charm to it. Now the graphics aren't very good and the animation is choppy, but it looks like the toys still. This game definitely won't be for everyone, but if you're willing to stick with it, there's a fun adventure here with a surprising amount of personality.
We must speak more quietly. We might be...
Alright, let's get serious now with Haunting Ground from Capcom. This is a really cool survival horror game that does crop up a lot in these videos, and I wasn't going to include it for that reason, but then I played it for a couple of hours and I absolutely had to. You play as Fiona, who wakes up in a cage with no memory of how she got there. There's a horrible looking man-child chopping up meat, and you get the feeling that you're next. Somehow you manage to escape as you realise the lock on your cage isn't actually locked, and then as you progress through the game you remember being in a car crash and that the people in the creepy castle that you appear to be trapped in might have had something to do with it. Being a survival horror game, you'll have to explore the massive castle that's filled with all sorts of strange creatures, ghosts, traps and puzzles, and you'll need to collect items and use them to complete the various puzzles throughout the game. You know, usual survival horror stuff, but I don't mean that in a bad way. Now, for a survival horror protagonist, Fiona is actually quite competent. You can sprint, but will run out of stamina if you run for too long. Some items you find can replenish your stamina halfway through running if you need it though. She can also kick, which is mainly used to smash open vases that contain items, but can also destroy certain things in levels and even be used to stun certain enemies. If you're sprinting, you can even do a little shoulder barge thing which will even stun the bigger enemies, and really gives you a feeling that while you're still in danger, you're not completely useless. You can also throw certain items to cause distractions or to stun enemies. But the main thing here is that early on, you meet a dog called Huey that you rescue, and he follows you around for the rest of the game. You can give him commands like collecting items that you can't reach, going through gaps that you can't fit through, or sniffing out stuff that you may not have seen. There's enemies around, you can even get him to attack them so you can run past. And yes, you can pet him and tell him he's a good boy as often as you want. In fact, this is something that you have to do as you do have a proper friendship with him. So if he does what you ask him, make sure you stroke him and tell him he's a good boy so he carries on. If he doesn't listen to you or just buggers off for no reason, you can scold him and tell him he's a bad boy. You need to do this if you want to get the most out of him. And speaking of enemies, there aren't a huge amount, mainly the big lumbering man monster thing. He'll appear from time to time and chase you. In these sections you need to run away and hide. You can get the dog to attack him to stall him, or you can even lay traps. Then you'll want to find a cupboard to hide in or a bed to hide under, but if you hide in the same place quite a few times, you will get found out. It can be quite tense. There's also blue wisp things that follow you around. If they touch you, they'll make you go mental for a few seconds, and you can't control your character, who'll be running around like an idiot, hitting her head in walls and damaging herself. Both the dog and Fiona have stamina and health, which is never visually represented with a bar or anything. Instead, you've got to watch their animations for clues as to how they're feeling. And speaking of animations, they are really good here. The graphics are fantastic in the game, and all the crazy characters, ghosts and cutscenes just look great. The environments are also suitably creepy. I wouldn't say this game is scary, but it does have a really great horror atmosphere. Now, there's actually a lot more to the gameplay, with crafting and things like that being possible, and you can even play fetch with your dog, but finding out all that stuff is half the fun. Survival horror games are some of my favourites, and even though I've known about this game for ages, it's the first time I've actually played it, and I'm having a really good time. Definitely a must-own if you like this sort of thing. If you're hungry for more horror, then check out Hungry Ghosts. Yeah, that wasn't clever. This is a first-person survival horror game that was sadly only released in Japan, and doesn't have any translation patch that I could find. Not that I can patch games on my totally legit PS2 anyway. As far as I can tell, you're some sort of dead man being taken to the afterlife, and from the looks of it, you've not been a very good man. You're being taken down a river by a bloke in a hood and asked a bunch of questions, all in Japanese, so I've got no idea what. But from the looks of things, this game is all about morality, and I really wish it was in English, as it really looks like my kind of game. Even without knowing what was going on though, I was able to force my way quite far into it, well, the first couple of hours at least. It's all played in first person, and you walk around a nasty looking environment, and I mean nasty as in spooky, as the graphics here are bloody brilliant. You're armed with a spear and a crossbow, and you can use these to smash barrels around the environment, as well as attack the many enemies that you'll come across. Barrels contain items, and there's a fair few items here, and I'm really not sure what a lot of them do. There's some that are used for health, whereas others I was able to throw, and some I was even able to use on plates as offerings that would cause these ghosts to suddenly appear and then bugger off. I don't know if I was appeasing their soul or just paying a toll to get past. Again, I really wish I could understand what was going on. Some barrels have water in them and others have oil. You can use this tactically to start or put out fires in certain places to clear an area or help out in a fight, or if you're like me, to accidentally kill yourself with. There's monsters here, and these are mostly in the forms of various ghosts, ghouls and zombies, and the ones I've seen really look great and were actually quite spooky. The combat here, and in fact the controls in general, aren't quite what you'd expect though. You move and rotate with the left analog stick and use the shoulder buttons to strafe and use items. To attack, you use the right analog stick, and pushing forward will thrust your weapon ahead, or pulling it back will charge a more powerful attack. Timing is everything here, and the enemies are quite tough. Often they'll drop more items like keys and things like that for you. Sometimes enemies or boxes will have a selection of items to pick up, but you only get to choose one. Again, I'd really like to know why. I do think this game is all about choices you make and will likely branch off into different ways depending on what you use where. And really, that's about all I can tell you for this one. I am about 2 hours in, but probably nowhere near as far in as someone who can read the language would be in this time. But I'm so intrigued with the game. The graphics are excellent, and I really like exploring the twisted locations and seeing the horrible monsters, and I really want to know what else the game has in store. Now, this might be one that I'm better off watching a long play of rather than playing myself, but it's just such a cool game that I had to include it. If there ever is a localization, I'll definitely pick it up, but let's face it, there won't be. And finally for today, it's time to stop being scared and start laughing with Harvey Birdman, Attorney at Law. This is a really cool game based on the awesome Adult Swim cartoon that came out at the same time as the likes of C-Lab and The Brack Show, which are some of my favourite cartoons and you should check them out. Here we follow the adventures of ex-superhero Harvey Birdman, who is now an attorney, and the game is a visual novel style courtroom comedy drama, where you're given a handful of cases and you've got to visit various locations, talk to witnesses and suspects, gather evidence and ultimately solve the case. If you've ever played a Phoenix Wright game, it's basically that, but reskinned, and that's a good thing. There's only 6 cases here to complete, which is a bit of a shame, and it can be done in just a few hours. But the real thing here are the stories themselves and the characters and the funny writing. This is a game that has some actual laugh out loud moments. In one case, your friend is accused of burning down your house, in another, your office is robbed, and so on. They're all daft and feature a number of well-known characters from the 60s onwards, like Secret Squirrel and Inch-High Private Eye. It was great to see them, and I'd completely forgotten about both of them. And there's a load of others that I do recognise, but couldn't tell you who they are. You do have to watch a lot of cutscenes here and really listen to what the characters say. Again, that's kind of the point of the game though, as they give you clues that match up with the evidence you find, and you've got to present the evidence in court in order to prosecute the characters. It plays simply enough and is just a case of moving a cursor around with the D-pad and pressing X to select what you want to do. You do only have a few attempts to choose the correct evidence and talk to the right people at the right times, and if you run out of attempts then you'll fail the case and have to start again. This does mean though that the game has pretty much no replay value, and the fact that it can be completed in just a couple of hours means it's not likely it's one that you'll come back to once you've beaten it. But it really is fun to play through, as it's just a bunch of interactive episodes of the show. It looks great and the animation is right out of the cartoon and the voice acting is spot on. I had a real laugh playing through this one, or at least the first 4 cases. I still have the last 2 to do, but didn't want to finish it all too quickly. But yeah, I would recommend giving this one a go.
A coffee cup, a set of keys, a stack of money, and a death ray console that runs on tubes. I'll round up the suspects and see you at the jail.
So there you go, another 10 games for the PS2 that you might not have heard about. As always, what other games could I have included? And more importantly, did you miss Belt Buckle Bill? And yes, if you want your voice featured in a future video, just let me know and we'll see if we can sort it out. But now, all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Haven't seen it.
Shucks. Oh, and I left my death ray somewhere.
It's